titulado Mujeres en Lucha, Género y Derechos Humanos en Historia Reciente de África, América Latina y el Caribe. El curso forma parte
This course is a part of the official activities preceding the hosting of the World Forum on Human Rights that will be hosted in the coming year in the city of Buenos Aires, Argentina. In the video section of the platform, you will find the audiovisual material for the forum. My name is India Belbucia. I will be moderating today's session. This morning, we are being joined by Fernanda Gil Lozano, Horacio Pietragalacorti, and Andrés Morales. Fernanda Gil Lozano is the Executive Director of the International Center for the Promotion of Human Rights, UNESCO. Before that, she was a member of the Mercosur Parliament in representation of Argentina. She achieved the signature of major agreements with national, regional, and international organizations and generated several endeavors of her own, along with other Parliament members in issues concerning health, education, human rights, and international politics. She published extensively on specialized magazines, and she directs the collection of the history of women in Argentina. Among her publications are the participation as co-author of books like Latin American History, 172,005 Societies, Cultures, Political and Economic Processes, an overview of history and common and shared problems in the regional countries with a debate about history. You will find her complete CV on the platform. Director Gil Lozano, you are welcome to the course. You have the floor. You have 10 minutes for your presentation. Hello, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or morning. I am pleased to greet you in my character as the Executive Director of the CIPGH UNESCO to start with the opening of the 6th edition of the International Course on Human Rights. Today, we are here to discuss this issue. I please ask all of you to be open-minded, struggling women, gender, human rights in the recent history of Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean area. I am really thankful to all the people that are connected at this time from different parts of the world, as well as the organization team that has worked very hard and managed to achieve 1,600 participants from 36 different countries. Tackling the issue of struggling women is, for me, as a historian, as a teacher of the University of Buenos Aires, as a historical activist in women's movements, is a wonderful and rewarding challenge. The construction of history and memory was invisibilizing women, and they were passive agents in it. However, the success of female activism and the challenging of patriarchal movements has led to a change in history. Based on the global priorities of UNESCO, such as Africa and gender equality, and the goals of the organization, in particular the promotion of intercultural dialogue and the phenomenon of peace and nonviolence culture, this international course seeks to contribute through the examination of a number of topics that we selected in terms of the scope of human rights. Let me mention and reflect that many groups of brave and tenacious women that marked history, that are known throughout the world as those who marched every Thursday in Plaza de Mayo, demanding the trial of the perpetrators, and they achieved that. That was 1985. The women in Malvinas that were invisibilized at that time, and their role today in the conflict of the Southern Atlantic is being vindicated. Women from other countries of the Americas and Africa that have struggled to solve their conflicts with different policies regarding reconciliation that we will be hearing from today, that shows the multiplicity of the prophetic texts about the violations of human rights, and where they play a major role, and also leads to different views of collective resistance that the gender has modeled from the social and political aspects. Women have struggled physically and have left their imprints in history, and this course will be valuing that. The 9 days of this international course will be a space and opportunity for this reflection based on the experiences of the past and the present, and to envisage prospective future projects. for the quest of the human enforcement of human rights. The topics that will be discussed will turn around the awareness of human rights from a gender perspective, the role of women in war conflicts, in guerrilla organization, and the rise of right-wingers. To summarize, this seeks to strengthen the bond between gender and human rights in light of different experiences, the quest for justice, for the victims of crimes against humanity, there is historical reparation, economic reparation, and also cultural reparation, and the upholding of collective memory. Throughout the world, there are movements and wars that challenge us, and all of them cause cultural, social, and political changes where women play a major role, and they take on a meaning, like the recent killing of Maja Meaning, among many others, that struggle in different ways to put away the veil of oppression and injustice. This international course of traveling women and human rights in the recent history of Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean is a preceding activity to the World Human Rights Forum that will be hosted in Buenos Aires, Argentina in 2023. And the CIPDH UNESCO is carrying on along with the Secretariat and the commitment of all of the National Cabinet. You are all invited to follow the classes from international academicians and politicians. We are honored to have them, all of them, with us. Women that are made of iron, of fire. That's the lyrics of a popular song. Here you are presented with all of them. Thank you very much, Fernanda Gil Lozano. Very interesting presentation. Next, we'll hear from Horacio Petra Galacorti, who is the Secretary of Human Rights of Argentina. He was a national congressman twice. He was born in March 1976, and he was kidnapped during the latest civilian and military dictatorship in Argentina. In 2003, he recovered his identity. Secretary Petra Galacorti, you can start with your presentation. You are allocated 10 minutes. Thank you very much, everyone. I am honored to be at the beginning of this course, for the opening of this course. Let me first congratulate all my colleagues from the CIPDH, UNESCO also, for hosting this initiative, which is very valuable for training the men and women of our extended fatherland in the region. So conducting these training courses from the basis of the state, you know that CIPDH is in Argentina. This has to do with the growth of Argentina as of 2003, where there was a comprehensive reparation for the victims of the latest military dictatorship. As from that time, Argentina had a qualitative leap in terms of the handle of human rights and its commitment that was constitutionally undertaken. And those international commitments constitutionally undertaken. And for our country, this is a rise in terms of the discussion of human rights issues. I think this reparation and the trials, for instance, of the genocides that were moved after the first conviction in 2003, when Néstor Kirchner did away with the due diligence and the pardon laws. This is marked by the struggle of human rights organizations in our country, the mothers and grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, ex-detainees who never gave up in the face of an adverse scenario. There was a time when in Argentina it was difficult to conceive that reparation of the victim for the victims of state terrorism as a result of those years of impunity that were strengthening in the years of democracy. Fortunately, we achieved that reparation. Today, we have over 1,400 genocides that have been convicted of crimes against humanity. There are genocides that are fugitives and are residing in other countries, and we are chasing them along with the judicial branches of those countries where they are benefiting with double citizenships, so as they may be convicted, and there will be no room for impunity, because we know that's a germ for prospective violations of human rights. Today, in this course of struggling women, and this has to do what we are discussing here. If we think of Argentina without women who may have not struggled in their history, and over the latest decades, like their mothers and their mothers of Plaza de Mayo, those women arose from something noble, that is the love of a mother for their children, and that has been at the core of our society. They transformed the foundations, the underpinnings of our democracy. As a result of that struggle, we always claim that it is like a bridge, bringing together those white handkerchiefs that our mothers and grandmothers would wear with these handkerchiefs that today represent other struggles and other vindications, like the green handkerchief that represent the struggle of our women that have been teaching us so much, that is so helpful to think or to conceive ourselves as men that have been raised in a patriarchal society to be reshaped, and to think of a society in new terms where women play a key role. In the coming years, we need women to have that major role. On the core of the new political experiences in terms of political rights and in the development of countries, Argentina has played a major role in pushing forward equality in the face of those claims, and we'd like to tell you about the experiences we have had in our management so that other countries may replicate those experiences and may gradually build in that common sense of society that we need to make grounds so that those speeches of hatred and of denial may be pushed away and we may achieve a more equal society. In Argentina, we have an abhorrent event that was repudiated from all sectors. There is just one minor and selfish sector that failed to repudiate. That was the attack to the first female president of Argentina, today our vice president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. In the face of that attack, that fortunately, miraculously, was not successful because the shot failed, we understood that we need to strengthen the dialogue with our society and with all societies around the world. We can see how that speech of hatred is taking on a key role, a major role, not only in other places, in some places of the world, in the post-pandemic world. We need to come together and strengthen our societies so that they may not fall in the hands of these serial haters. New technology is an advancement to reach out to the bulk of societies around the world, but it also poses a problem in terms of the speed and the continuous flow of information that sometimes is fake information and that fosters hatred amongst the different sectors of society. That's why we understand this course is key, is paramount. I have had the review of the panel members of this course. They're outstanding celebrities, outstanding persons. Those who have a role of responsibility learned from some of them. Let me highlight the presence of Dora Barranco, one of the most prestigious women that has been so instructive for all of us as men in this patriarchal society to be able to understand those achievements that we have and also help us to rebuild ourselves as part of our society. So let me then celebrate the hosting of this course. We believe it will be helpful towards working, as I said earlier, towards a common goal. But all these scenarios and the courses that are being organized are part, as was claimed by Fernanda, as a part of the preceding activities of the World Human Rights Forum that will be hosted in March next year in the month of memory in Argentina. We expect to welcome lots of participants from all over the world. So once again, thank you, all of you, for joining us on this course. And we understand that both UNESCO and the CIPGH and the Secretariat of Human Rights are highly interested in something in particular, something that we were taught by our mothers and grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. That's the only struggle that is lost is the one that is given up. So this ongoing struggle to build common sense is based on the love we have for women that gave so much for our country, for the sake of our country, our history, and who are no longer with us. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. A very interesting and illustrative presentation. Next, we hear from Andrés Morales, specialist from the Social and Human Sciences sector of UNESCO for Latin America and the Caribbean. He is the head of the Program for Human Rights for the region, a lawyer from the University of Los Andes in Colombia, and he has been speaker in theme audiences before the International Commission of Human Rights, the American, and with experience in litigation in the Inter-American System of Human Rights, especially in issues related to liberty of expression and sex violence. You can find his full CV on the platform. Andrés Morales, you are welcome to the course. You are allocated 10 minutes for your presentation. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much, Horacio Petracala, Secretary of Human Rights and President of the Executive Council of the CIPDH, our dear Fernanda, and special greetings to all the members of the audience and also the panel members over the coming 9 days of this course. Let me get started by saying that for UNESCO, it's a privilege to join the 6th edition of the International Human Rights course organized by our Category 2 course, International Center for the Promotion of Human Rights, that is seated in Argentina. This center is somehow a little jewel for UNESCO. It was the first Category 2 center that we set up that specializes in human rights. The CIPDH is actually using this experience, and we have here 2 centers specializing in human rights, with the CIPDH being the first one. I would like to commend and to thank Argentina for its ongoing support to the center. This is a reflection of the commitment of the country to human rights and the leadership so that this issue may stay alive on the international agenda. We are trustful that the government of Argentina, along with UNESCO, will keep strengthening the center and as well as its initiatives. And this course is a good example that is in the correct pathway towards promoting and promoting human rights. I am happy to see this course starting right today, which is a very special day for UNESCO, as well as for the United Nations in general. On October the 24th, 1945, the UN Charter was becoming effective. In the preamble of the Charter, we sustain the faith in human rights, in dignity, and in human beings in general. And the Charter, in its preamble, persists in the equal rights for women and men. At UNESCO, as was pointed out by Fernanda, gender equality and Africa are the two global priorities of our organization. And I am happy to see those lines of actions that are key or the center of the core of this course. Today, we are starting this course to exchange knowledge and to put the rights of women at the spotlight of dignity. I am happy to see that throughout these 9 days, we'll be discussing in depth about challenges and obstacles towards achieving gender equality, and that we may also review their interaction and sometimes intersections with other barriers in other types of human rights that many times escalate gender inequality. Each member of this course audience plays a key role to keep fighting stereotypes, roles, and discrimination deeply affecting the rights of women. Let us trust that this course will provide us with further tools and further review to implement initiatives that may help us fight discrimination and limitations to the rights of women. And let me also commend the center panel members and audience members, and I trust that this course will be very helpful towards putting on the agenda the relevance of gender equality in our country. Thank you very much, Fernanda. Thank you very much to the center, and let us trust that all participants of this course will be contribute to major knowledge about the key issue that this is a key issue in the international agenda. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Andrés Morales. Muy interesante su presentación. Esperamos que así sea. Con esto vamos por finalizado este panel.
And with this, we've finished.
A continuación le daremos la palabra a las coordinadoras académicas de esta sexta edición del Curso Internacional de Derechos Humanos, las doctoras Andrea Andújar y Marisa Pinó.
So now we'll hear PhDs. Andújar and Pinó. Andújar has a degree in history. She's also a researcher from the Gender Studies at Buenos Aires University, independent concept researcher, history professor in various Argentinian universities. She's a member of a gender-based collective specialized in history, Argentinian history with gender perspective. She's also studied Argentina in the 20th century and has authored many books and journals and articles in many specialized academic journals. You can find the full biography in the platform. Ms. Pino currently works at the Literature and Philosophy Buenos Aires University, heading the History Department, and she also works at the Multidisciplinary Asian and Africa Studies section, and she also runs a space Connected Histories, Ideas, Representations, Trajectories from the 16th to the 20th century. And you can also find her full biography in the platform. Now we'll give the floor to our speakers, and we deeply thank you for being here today. Please remember that each of you has 30 minutes for your presentation. You can go ahead.
Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches.
Bonjour, bonsoir.
Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. I also want to join you, welcome you to this international course, whose 6th edition is called Women in Fight, Gender and Human Rights in the Recent History of Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. We consider that the history of women and feminism has had a strong impact in the field of human rights, causing a profound renovation both in the theoretical and analytical dimensions as in the development of public policies of the states and supranational authorities that need to enforce those things. That's why the wars, extreme violence against the state under authoritarian regimes, democratic or not, started to be inquired from a perspective, from a look that was willing to question gender, class, skin color, or racialized marks, ethnic origin, etc. That is what we could consider a cross-sectional perspective, playing a key role at the time of defining or redefining or reinterpreting vital questions such as repressive violences or crimes against humanity or serious human rights violations. A clear example in this sense are sexual violences in clandestine detention centers that, thanks to profound activism related to gender and the history of women and feminism, those violences began to be understood also as crimes against humanity. Also, gender has allowed to understand more profoundly practices of resistance, women's collectives and sexual dissidences that generated very important policies to demand respect for human rights and to face and protect against practices of authoritarian government against those minorities. However, despite these renewals or these contributions, and we could say that even these contributions, albeit very important, remain in a restricted environment. They are not very well known for vast majorities, vast spaces of research. And this also relates to the punishment of those culprits of crimes against humanity. And so the dissemination of the knowledge produced in academic spaces is still limited, as well as the practices of activism in relation to these fruitful interrelationships between human rights, women's studies, and history. And that's the goal this course wants to take. We need to contribute to this knowledge and these results to having more dissemination. That's why we call a big variety of specialists on the different panels we'll have every day to have from multiple disciplines, from different regions, from different specializations, and also from different generations, and even with different perspectives, with different looks regarding the meanings and feminist theories. But they all share their commitment to human rights, and they share common sensitivity to the history of women and feminism, and they also share their permanent intention to bring novelties and bring new lights to the discussions we'll have every day. They also have a very solid bibliography and literature to expand the topics we'll be discussing, And this bibliography is easily available to have access to all these topics. And one that we consider very important that has to do with the role of women in wars. And after the anniversary of the Malvinas War, we'll have a special panel to reflect on this conflict that took place 40 years ago between Argentina and Great Britain. We expect that this course will be useful to highlight the importance of thinking about human rights with a gender perspective, to think about historical fight and respect for human rights from this perspective, and also investigate, prosecute the culprits of crimes against humanity also in these terms. So we expect that this course will be really useful for you, that you can participate, that you will find it interesting, and above all, that it will help you reflect even further. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am Marisa Pinot, also academic coordinator, together with Andrea, of this course, Fighting and Struggle. This course starts today until November the 3rd. We'll be meeting every morning at 10 a.m. Buenos Aires time or 2 p.m. Buenos Aires time. So please adjust your agendas depending on your local time. Before we start, I'd like to make some practical comments regarding the functioning of this course, and also to tell you how we'll be moving and working in the days ahead. After we finish our talk, we'll have the pleasure of having the lecture of a great political representative from our continent, who is Nila Heredia. She's from Bolivia, with a very long track record of activist fights for human rights. So much so that no topic is alien to her. And she has held one of the highest ranks in her country because she was Minister of Health during Evo Morales' administration. She will be given the opening lecture, and it's a real pleasure for us to have her today. We're also very happy to say who will be giving the closing lecture. It will be Dilma Rousseff, of all people. She was chosen twice by the Brazilian people as president of her country. And she also has reached that position because all along her life she developed great activism and political participation. And she suffered torture and jail. So I think that both Nila and Dilma are two great representatives of what we want to display in this course, or actually what we want to reflect upon in this course, which are women and fight, women in struggling. In addition to this and the panels that we invite you to have a review at the whole list of talks that we'll be having, this is available at the campus. We invite you to take part in the asynchronous activities. These are varied, very different. Some of them are films, documentaries that we suggest to sensitize yourself and to have a closer look to these topics both in Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. And also during those asynchronous activities, we recommend you to visit different websites where you will find activities in different museums, sites of memory, and other NGOs that work with activities related to women's struggle and human rights. These activities and museums range from one in South Africa to the site of memory of Memoria Abierta, or open memory. also the Anne Frank Center. And there's also another one related to Rawson genocide. They are very different, very interesting, and I'm sure that they will help us have a broader perspective on these topics. And also, as this course is intended not only to be a one-way course, and I'm sure you will also be interested in giving your opinions, telling us what you think. We want this to be a two-way course. And you can leave your comments or questions at the forum that will be open for communication. There you can leave your questions, suggestions, comments regarding each panel. And in each panel, if the time allows it, we will try to take all those comments into account, so you can ask questions to the different lecturers. Finally, there is a networking space so that you can talk to each other. We'd love to create new networks of knowledge, to cross borders, and to relate people that have not met each other so far, but who share common interests. So this course could be the starting point for new networks, for new knowledge and activities. So you are welcome to this course, and we hope this course and this event will be a real success for all of us, and that we all learn a lot from this course. Thank you.
Micrófono. Bueno, antes de continuar, queremos recordarles que quienes deseen aprovechar.
So before we move on, we'd like to remind you that those that want to make the virtual visits to Ana Frank Center in Argentina should sign up in the forms indicated, together with the indications received by email last Friday. The places are limited and the first visit is tomorrow, so please, you can sign up today. Finally, we'll hear Nila Heredia Miranda, who will be giving us a keynote lecture called Racism, Gender and Human Rights, Balances and Challenges for an International Public Agenda. Dr. Nila Heredia Miranda is a surgeon. She presides the Directorio Caja Petrolera de Salud Bolivia 2021. She was Executive Secretary of the Andean Health Body Hipólito Unanue Agreement. The Secretariat works in response to health ministers of the 6 Andean countries. She presided the Truth Commissions of Bolivia with 3 Bolivian personalities. She was also Minister of Health and Sports of the plurinational state of Bolivia twice, and she was also Dean and Vice Dean of San Andrés Bolivia University, and she's also an authority of the School of Medicine at UMSA University. She was in charge of the general coordination of the Latin American Social Medicine Association. She also presided the Latin American Federations of Relatives of Detainees, Disappeared Detainees, FEDAM, and she is ex-president and member of the Association of Families or Relatives of the detainees, disappeared detainees and martyrs for national liberation. So, Doctor, we welcome you to the course. We appreciate your participation here, and we remind you that you have 60 minutes for your lectures. We hear you, Ms. Nila. Nila, we can't hear you. I think you are muted. Could you please turn it on? So, let's check if we can hear her. Maybe she's using a mobile headset. So, just a few moments until we can work out these technical issues so that Dr. Nila can reconnect. We'll be back in just a few minutes once everything is ready to go on. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can now. We can hear you perfectly, Ms. Nila. Good morning. I really appreciate this opportunity for such an important course. I'd like to talk about one of the most important topics to me, which is racial discrimination, and primarily discrimination against indigenous peoples and Afro-descendant peoples. And it is really painful also when this affects gender issues. People who work on these topics surely know that this is a time to interconnect various ideas that are present around the world in recent years, particularly in our continent and subcontinent. The issue of the strong emergence of struggles for the rights of indigenous peoples and Afro-descendant peoples. These have been topics that have united countries, maybe more in some regions than in others, but evidently they have generated a sense of urgency to discuss and work on the issue of discrimination. It has not been treated with the same intensity everywhere, and today we regret that topics such urgent as this one, and it's paramount to generate mechanisms to deal with them. I am sure that this will generate reactions of rejection and discomfort with situations of discrimination that we find all the times. And this generates questionings at all levels of the state. Because there are groups with privileges there are groups of sectors of power that strive to maintain a sense of superiority above others. They hope for a better, equal world. It takes place at places of international cooperation such as UNESCO or others. After times of very difficult times as the Second World War, which was the origin of many institutions that dealt with these topics that create so much suffering. Today, there is also a strong increase in discriminatory attitudes in society in different regions. It is important to see how, for example, in this case, in the last painful stage that we have lived with COVID-19, there were some states that evidently or non-evidently did not provide the same care to all people during the COVID-19 pandemic, and indigenous groups had to provide care to themselves. Although in many cases, they definitely required medicine and traditional medicine. And even there were some heads of states that said right away that indigenous people were people of lower level that could very well die. And this has not received sufficient repercussions at the international level. And also the attitude to women that also suffer discrimination in different ways, both at general level and individual level in some cases. In these circumstances, and despite the hard work done at the international level, and that we have a lot of literature available, and of the interest from international spheres, the news were not disseminated equally in different national and international media. And the states stimulate and encourage situations for the benefit of a few in a current world with strong strains and tensions and also interests. In the historical moment we are in, this is very complex, full of confusion, a moment that many of us cannot understand, because the world has changed a lot recently. And we see in amazement that after 20 years of this century, some of the questions we had before are more and more confusing because mechanisms for individual and collective file have changed.
Y ve a los otros tal vez de manera muy lejana. Mientras tanto, nosotros, digamos, también entre inseguridades y miedos,
our insecurities and fear lead us into envisaging a way into the future where the groups may be present, not just the individuals, but also the groups with new intentions, but we also evidenced facts. It's also important to highlight that the atrocities in Europe that were revealed after the end of the Second World War undoubtedly generated an acceptable treatment of the issue for the restitution of rights for some cases and the punishment of father for the perpetrators of the atrocities during the Second World War, and even though they were not enough, at least paved the way to tackle the issue of race discrimination among the abhorrences of in the world. The enthusiasm of the stakeholders at that moment achieved the visibilization of the magnitude of discrimination. And it also encourages the involvement of the stakeholders. And those meetings that were conducted to tackle this issue, that were also strengthened with the involvement of delegation of indigenous peoples lately, led to major advancements at conceptual level. I think that had there not been the Holocaust in Europe, maybe today we would still be far from treating the issue of race discrimination. The millions of indigenous murdered and killed during the times of exploitation of mineral resources in the Americas after the conquest of the continent, and also the killings of millions of Africans that were snatched from their original lands and killed here. Maybe these facts would not have been recognized and identified. In spite of everything, it's not been easy that European leaders may acknowledge and admit. And it sometimes is still today difficult for them to recognize the abhorrence of in America. And what are the mechanisms and the reasons why small groups of invaders manage to impose themselves over in Latin American and American grounds that were strongly politically and culturally developed for those times? Why was this imposition, or why did the imposition prevail? Why did the destruction prevail? The destruction of the culture prevail? That would not have been possible. The destruction of organizations, families, populations, and cultures, had it not been through mechanisms of domination where not only there is the military issue involved, but also the religious one, and the use of mechanisms to generate or would have generated worshipping feeling on the side of native peoples that were actually promoted during the 4 or 5 centuries of domination. This byproduct, this is the byproduct of the view of superiority of ones over the others that were actually rendered acute as these native populations have maintained their resistances to demand for recognition of their rights. The feeling of superiority created by invaders had a counterpart, that is the feeling of inferiority and duty of obedience of the others that were racially different. That is a superiority that was structured by a political military scheme that, in spite of the years that have gone by, largely persists, and is even promoted. A heritage at social level that is limited in terms of the naturalization of race discrimination in our continent. That is, that type of discrimination over the racially different is natural and is also socialized. Aníbal Quijano, a Peruvian sociologist, quoted by Enrique Dussel, another important sociologist, sustained that in the Americas there was a new pattern of power that was mainly based on the race level. That is, race as the main biological difference that justifies the natural superiority in the face of the natural inferiority of the other race. Race became a key element of the relationship of domination during the times of the conqueror. In spite of the 78 years of operation of the UN and the numerous meetings and declarations, there is still a race discrimination process in not just in the indigenous and the Afros, but also in terms of gender. And that's quite anguish in rural areas especially. And this leads me into the historical infringement of the rights of native populations and also of that of Afro-descendants. That is, the violation of the rights of Afro-descendants in our countries. That these are two different groups, but at the same time they are similar. Race hatred that has been generated so far in some of our states leads to the exclusion of all types of rights, except for financial interests or political interests of the prevailing groups or dominant groups. They are also different because Afro-descendants, even today, are denied of their belonging to this land, and therefore they are established right to have established power to have rights in this land. In some countries, it is unbelievable to see there is still a challenge to the right of having rights in those lands. They have been inhabited for so many years, and they are deprived of the same rights as the indigenous or native peoples have. In that sense, they are the same, exposed to the same type of struggles, even though they may be somewhat different. They did not consider the decisions that were made. The desires of the indigenous peoples have evidenced a real state of affairs of things in the case of indigenous populations and the discrimination of indigenous population Afro-descendants, and that there has been scarcely any progress. It's not about the lack of legislation, but it's about those prejudices and persisting attitudes of dominant thinking that persists in most of the state leaders, as they feel superior as the whiter you are, or and the closer they are to northern countries, in particular the United States and European countries. So, if they that's just like a proof of the capacity of our countries. In spite of the valuable experiences of many progressive governments in our continent that managed to reduce the levels of poverty substantially and resolve social problems like access to education or reduce exclusion and the recognition of major rights. It is also evident that the issue that has to do with the rights of indigenous populations and Afro-descendant populations have not been comprehensively tackled. It's not about legislation or institutionalization of the race issues to deal with them from a different perspective. It's about policies that may comprehend all of the native and non-native populations. Definitely, it is not possible to resolve the issue by tackling only a segment of the population. I believe it is imperative to include plans for minority groups at a political and cultural level whose feelings rooted in presumed rights currently claims from the state through a series of structures that may ensure a privileged system and that somehow protects the feeling of superiority of some to the detriment of the rights of indigenous populations and Afro-descendant populations. I come from Bolivia, and the Bolivian experience may be one of the most advanced in terms of the recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples. To the extent that Bolivia was able to conduct a constitutional assembly as a result of the lobbying of indigenous peoples. To the president that took over in 2006, that was Mr. Evo Morales, who comes from a native population. And as president of the Republic, through the enforcement of the currently effective legislation resulting from colonial times, actually led to indigenous peoples that decided to elect this indigenous president. But it's not just an issue of form or just to put an indigenous person in power, but to have someone who represents us and who may also convene a constitutional assembly that may lead to the recognition of the rights and the existence itself of multiple native or original peoples residing in Bolivian ground, thereby recognizing their rights and their existence. It is worth noting that the Republic of Bolivia, that became independent by conducting this constitutional assembly in 2006, and that was ratified in 2009 after certain strains and struggles. The name of Bolivia was changed into the plurinational state of Bolivia. Why plurinational? Because that constitution recognizes the existence of different native people. It was not, Bolivia did not just independ itself from colonialism and European imperialism, but the moment of independence led to the independence under colonial times, even though modernized, were still a part of the colonial mechanisms. So at that moment, that there was a struggle of the indigenous peoples that were not just in at the level of the armies of liberty that is actually certainly acknowledged, but that would not have been possible unless the natives and the Afro descendants had also struggled. And those struggles were not recognized at the times of independence because the Constitutional Assembly members would not recognize the values outside the colonial culture. To be a member of the Constitutional Assembly, you should be someone who would be a male person with who would be relevant or play a relevant role in society. Native populations were and still are there and still build. In that sense, the Bolivian experience based on the struggles of the people show that it is possible that the states may recognize the existence of these peoples. In that sense, I had the chance of being part of the Evo Morales first and second administration. That it was during the first administration that marked a landmark in this issue. What was the line of action of that government that was adequately defined by President Evo Morales? A person who comes from a native group, who had long struggled for the rights of indigenous people he is part of. The first cabinet meeting marked 2 or 3 lines of actions. One of them involved having in mind that it was the government of everyone, where indigenous related issues were not just peculiar or individual ones, because indigenous peoples were part of the country and therefore indigenous rights should be dealt with on an equal footing as everyone else's rights, because it was indigenous peoples that had managed to conquer a political momentum, and there should no longer be a ministry or a secretariat or an office dealing with the issues of indigenous people as something peculiar or specialized, but it should be considered as a whole, as the approach of everyone's ministries. So, indigenous peoples should be seen as an entirety, as a comprehensive, as an inherent part of the state. And therefore, all issues concerning indigenous peoples should be dealt with on an equal footing to all other issues. So this rationale of acknowledging native indigenous nations and Afro-descendants in the country, which are very few in the country, the decision in Bolivia is that Afro-descendants may be recognized to the same level of rights and duties as are the other native groups. And therefore, there are no discrepancies in the way the issues related to them are dealt with at the state level. This issue was also reflected in the case of the Ministry of Health I was part of. There was an immediate inclusion of the health care through traditional health care that was included as part of the ministry. It's strongly recognized here, and at the same time is legitimized by the rest of the Americas, which assumes that the Western medical knowledge is superior and and that traditional knowledge, as they are not scientifically compiled, would not be useful. This rationale that we have not yet been able to figure out has attempted and still attempts to prevail, not only by neglecting the traditional knowledge and general medical knowledge in particular, but also through lines of work and mechanisms that under the interculturality rationale may acknowledge the existence of this knowledge and may also lead towards the society learning about this to the extent that they know about traditional or Western medical knowledge. The COVID pandemic has had an effect in the treatment of population that has been different. As a result of a coup d'etat in Bolivia in November 2019, during 2020, we were under a civilian and military government that entailed a repression of the population, and therefore the pandemics caught us by storm in Bolivia at a very difficult time, and healthcare was also only restricted to cities or provided in cities, whereas indigenous populations were left to their own devices or poorly served. At the same time, traditional medicine has been very useful in those cases. And those traditional medical doctors managed to bring traditional medicine over to cities in spite of the movement restrictions and led to the consumption of traditional medicines that have not been yet sufficiently studied to see what results those treatments brought about. From the psychological and social point of view, yet the population, one way or the other, felt protected and served by these sectors that were largely neglected, but which are certainly cherished and respected in spite of all the discrepancies and in spite of all the mechanisms to render them neglected. These issues become relevant because I cannot expose theoretically if I do not use these examples that we have as the basis. So I strongly conclude that it is not possible to achieve major progress in the rights of native indigenous peoples except through the organization of these populations. Only popular involvement and through the organization, as I was saying, and the involvement of the members of the population, it's possible to progress and to do away with the discrepancies and the discrimination against native population and against Afro-descendant populations. Through that organization, we could generate policies to pave the way for this. It is apparent that racism cannot be disabled overnight. Painfully, I may say that those social structures that were with this feeling of superiority lead to incoherent attitudes. Let me repeat, I will be speaking about what happens in my country, where there have been very tough situations and major assaults to the members of the indigenous members of the Constitutional Assembly. And after the coup d'etat we had in 2019 in Bolivia, the key issue was to destroy or do away with the rights and beliefs of people through the destructions of native symbols that are rooted in our societies. It is not possible to progress in terms of rights, but through the strong commitment on the side of the states and the state organizations to put on the table the necessary mechanisms and tools to generate feelings of superiority, whether for religion or culture or through other types of organization that may generate feelings of superiority. Because contrarily, and as time goes by, it's the peoples that do away with those types of rights. I believe that international organizations and states themselves should come up with actions that may allow us to overcome those feelings of rejection and resistance towards others, toward different groups. A very specific issue lies in the unexplainable discrimination in terms of gender, that in addition to race discrimination, causes a discrimination rationale to the extent that it needs to be strongly tackled by all states. Mental constructions through all types of mechanisms that are strong rooted in education and in religion turn women today not just into an object in spite of the intense struggles in the cities. That does not influence on the rights of women at the indigenous level, because indigenous women are objects and subjects. They are generally seen as an object, and they are exposed to all different of abuses that are empowered by economic needs of women, especially indigenous women, because indigenous women are the ones that maintain and guarantee the family group. It's the indigenous woman that typically stays at home and strengthens the household economy, whether through their work at the community level, but also by working in all kinds of jobs, maybe by selling on the street or all types of tasks, or maybe housework doing. So they bear this dual weight of guaranteeing the welfare of the family and the education of the family, and also to support their male partners whose rights are also infringed. Yet, women are discriminated, are mistreated, and typically neglected in state reports. This situation and this discrimination of women that is based on race happens in different scenarios and should be tackled differently from the rights that are being defended by women in general. That's the right of abortion.
Which, by the way, I think it's positive, but also the right of women to have rights, and the right of indigenous women to be acknowledged, first because of gender rights, but also the rights in the framework of racial rights. In this sense, I think this is one of the most urgent tasks that need to lead to a better reading or understanding from international bodies in regards to the things that are included in various reports issued by international bodies. Frequently, women are poorly portrayed in those reports. In this sense, I repeat, this is something that should be addressed. And once again, I want to stress the importance of the popular participation. It is essential that indigenous women play a role in the acknowledgement of their rights as women, so that those rights are structural and allow them to fight for rights that, unlike citizen rights, are more individual. Indigenous women need to fight socially and as a group. Our experience is showing that the fight for the respect of women's rights also depend on the degree of organization of Bolivian women to achieve those rights and to enforce them. When indigenous or Afro-descendant women assume a task of representation, this work is done with more eagerness because they know that the future of their children depend on those tasks and on their work. And there are women with indigenous or Afro-descendant origin today have the possibility of having the hope of a better world. In this sense, I think that other topics should also be considered. First, if we consider that Afro-descendants in the Americas are about 300 million, and they account for a small percentage of the populations in the region, and based on the Sustainable Growth Report, indigenous peoples were the native indigenous population in our continent accounts from 10 to 15%, which would mean that about 40% of the Latin American population is made up by indigenous and Afro-descending people. And why not take this data into account so that indigenous affairs and the affairs of Afro-descendants are addressed in such a way to enforce the rights acknowledged by the United Nations. Afro-descendants and native populations are victims to slavery, have been victims to slavery, particularly on Afro-descendants, and they continue to suffer the consequences. Therefore, it's important to support the adoption of international standards regarding the rights of native peoples and Afro-descendants, and in the development of an action plan of the UN plans for Afro-descendants in the months to come. At international level, it is important the recognition and acknowledgement of natives and Afro-descendant peoples, now more related to Afro-descendants, as collective subjects of rights. They must be acknowledged as collective subjects of rights, not only as individual subjects, but as collective subjects. The statistical visibility of the native and Afro-descendant population should be incorporated to all scenarios and to all statistics. That is to say that it should be included, this variable should be included in our statistics for healthcare or for other topics, acknowledging the existence of these groups and considering the determinant factors that affect their living. The racial ethnic factor should be taken as an autonomous determinant for the quality of life of native and Afro-descendant populations. It is not possible to make a reading of the living conditions of natives and Afro-descendants if we do not take into account the social determinants where they live. Therefore, the conceptual methodological development should differentiate from this perspective. There is a very important topic, which is the articulation between racism and migration. Migrations often have the perspective of racial groups that gradually develop notifications in countries when feeling supposedly invaded have discriminatory attitudes. And nowadays, we also have the climate change crisis that more and more is affecting native populations whose lives used to be in a certain way and today is getting modified. The attitude of environmental destruction plays a very important role. Indigenous peoples and Afro-descendants are being threatened, being owners of their territory. Today are a threat because governments and the various authorities, regional authorities, seem to be determining the future of these populations. Today we're seeing the destruction of the Amazon and the destructions or aggression or attacks to indigenous peoples who are in contact with this or who are forced to migrate or die. This is to say, it is not the violence of natural development, but violence focused on environmental destruction, on the use of lands for monocrop, single crops, or for the use of lands for mining, that not only harm and neglect rights, but they also generate climate change at levels that are impossible to measure. Racial discrimination kills as much as violence. Young women suffer this particularly. We're seeing this more and more.
Me parece que del racismo como un mecanismo de discriminación estructural.
Racism has a structural mechanism of discrimination that at the same time registers a participation of political and institutional decision-making parties. The greatest difficulties have to do with education that also favors the intergenerational transmission of these ideas. Also inequality to the labor market and the recognition of the structural inequalities and the disproportionate representation of this population in jails and disproportionate representation or traditional mechanisms that make of poor people, indigenous or Afro-descendants, as second-class citizens in the judiciary. So at least in principle, they are potential victims to this. And all this is reflected in the levels of discrimination we see. I think it is urgent to determine the need of defining public policies by all states that will enable to put on the table the topic of the rights of the indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, and the rights of women, especially indigenous or Afro-descendant women, to be considered as subjects of right. At the required levels, to find any kind of discrimination. That should be the main line to guide our work. And I want to finish by repeating and stressing only the people can determine the fate of the people. This is an old saying. And only the organized participation of the indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples, and only with a strong level of participation, will make it possible to avoid the destruction, will allow to destroy the sense of superiority and the aggressiveness that some people have against others, with the only purpose of maintaining privileges. And on the other hand, indigenous women should not only be respected, but also we should develop various mechanisms to enforce their rights, not only to be part of societies, but also the right to have the same rights as the rest of the population. I hope I may be wrong, but at least until 2007, indigenous women could not represent other people. Starting in 2007, indigenous women, being possibly heads of family, have the right to have their own properties at their own name and to be subjects of rights. But one thing is what you get at theoretical level, and a different thing is the practice. We need to keep fighting to make those roles a reality. And achieving this will depend on the women's struggles. In this sense, I think that we have many experiences that we could discuss. Once I had the chance of directing a health body, and through it, through an agreement through the ministers of health, we could define policies, health policies for indigenous peoples in the Andean countries. To do this, state should be very clear and forceful in their implementation of its policies. I will finish here. I hope I have covered all the topics I wanted to say, and I'm deeply thankful for this opportunity. I'm available to you for questions. Thank you very much, Nila. Your lecture has been wonderful. We really appreciate your participation here at CIPPH. As you have all noticed, Vice President Francia Marquez has not been able to attend due to some political affairs that she had to deal with. We want to remind you that to access a certificate, you need to attend 70% of the panels. Now we finish the first day of the Human Rights course, and we'll go back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Argentina time to listen to a panel called Euro-Centered or From the South, Global Views on Human Rights and Gender. We greet you, everyone, especially Dr. Heredia, who has given us this wonderful presentation. And now, while I have the chance of saying goodbye to my colleagues and see you back tomorrow. Dr. Heredia, thank you very much for your reflections, for sharing part of your experience. You have mentioned many great ideas to keep reflecting upon, and it's been a great honor to open this course with such a beautiful, profound, and potent conference. Thank you very much. Thank you, and have a very nice day. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. So with this, we finish the course for today. See you back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thank you very much.
Recordings.